So today in this video, I want to talk about how the gym, and of course the wider topic of exercise, is one of the best things for male mental health. Now, male mental health and mental health in general is this vast topic that's encompassing in the modern world, because we're going through this weird sort of realization that we have our basic survival needs yet beyond, we have beyond what we need. We have extravagance beyond belief, resources beyond belief, and yet we're still more miserable than ever. Why is that going on? You think we'd be satisfied with this modern world, and yet everyone seems to be quite unhappy. So my sort of little stab that I want to make at this many-headed hydra is that is the male sense of competency. I want to talk about competency today. So I believe that sense of competency is one of the fundamental units of the male ego. An incompetent man back in primal times was, and still is, a liability and often dead meat. What is often good to remember, and which I attempt to continually remind myself, is that we humans are still cavemen and proto-apes biologically speaking, no matter how nicely we dress up. Evolution is a very slow process. We sometimes, I think, purpose, tend to forget that because we've rapidly evolved in a cultural sense, and within a standard of living sense especially, we're somehow different from people that lived 100,000, even 100,000 years ago. No, we're still the same people biologically speaking. We just now have language and smartphones and interesting ways of communicating information. But underneath it all, at the genetic level, we're still very, very similar. So things that worked back then are often still relevant today, and often looking at the prehistoric lifestyle, that sort of caveman sort of thing, it's very simple to grasp, so it's a lot less complex than the modern world. You stake out your territory, you defend it from other people. It's a lot less complex than the myriad webs of relationships we have in the modern world. So what exactly does the gym have to do with all of this? Well, I believe that the gym furthers and reinforces your sense of competency as you demonstrate to yourself your ability to defer gratification and your willingness to accept responsibility. Now, I would argue that these are two of the most important skills you can hone within your life, and I've touched on the latter before on my channel in my video Fault and Responsibility, and we're going to be talking about it more today in this video. When we are discussing competency, accepting responsibility is key, as you are looking after the most valuable thing you own, namely your own body. If you're willing to do that, despite your first-hand knowledge of how undeserving you may be of gratification and help, as you're aware of all your shortcomings and your flaws and your evil thoughts and that sort of thing, then it becomes a simple task to look after other aspects of your life. After all, if you're already running a marathon, what's a quick jog to the shops? This roll-on effect of realizing your ability to take responsibility within other aspects of your life will increase your sense of competency even further as you begin to develop a greater mastery over your environment, which is an integral function of competency. If we think of a competent man in a very simple sense in the primal times, in the caveman times, a competent man would be someone who has his territory, has his cave, has his social unit, and that sort of thing, and he's the master of that place. If we consider the opposite of this, we can consider a man who would be incompetent, and his territory is beset by predators, it's beset by other gangs of men, his social circle hates him, and that sort of thing. We don't think of that man as a competent man, we think of that person as an incompetent man. But if the social circle is strong, if the territory has well-defined borders which other men know to stay away from, then that man has demonstrated a mastery over the environment, and he can be said to be competent. He will be an alpha male. Now, we as men are oh so acutely and painfully aware of when we are judged as to be incompetent, whether by ourselves or by our peers. We can probably all vividly remember what this feels like. I recall back in high school, we were doing cadets. Now, within cadets, there's multiple different skills you learn. You learn first aid, you learn obviously drill, but there's also navigation. And I remember being on cadet camp, and we were in our little platoon, and we were taking it in turns, in pairs, to navigate. Now, I was always hopeless at navigation. I just couldn't get it. I didn't make any sense, getting bearings, using landmarks, trying to find where we were on the map. I just couldn't do it. So when it came time for my pair, which included me, of course, to navigate, it was clear that I was a liability. I'm just there, I'm trying to help, but I can't do anything, and I'm feeling more miserable because everyone's noticing that I'm useless. They're noticing that I'm having to be carried by my partner in this, and he basically did all the work, and of course garnered all the respect for that, and everyone knew that I basically did nothing, and I was essentially letting the platoon down because I couldn't navigate us from A to B. Now this effect, this terrible sinking feeling that I'm sure we all know, has a roll-on effect into our biology. As we drop down the dominance hierarchy, which is essentially like a social ranking system, you are always ranking yourself in relative positions to other people, and it changes with different situations based on your skills and that sort of thing. This is where the sort of alpha and the beta thing comes from, the Chad and the Virgin sort of thing. So as you drop down the dominance hierarchy, males will produce less dopamine and less testosterone, which makes you chronically feel terrible and helps you in moving further down the dominance hierarchy as you become less happy and less willing to accept risk as a product of testosterone in an attempt to move back up the hierarchy. So linking back to my opening statement, the gym can essentially help with this by acting as a sort of all-in-one physical, mental, and hormonal booster. Setting goals and achieving them releases dopamine. This is part of the reason why video games can be so addictive, and why you shouldn't watch a lot of porn, why porn can be addictive, why drugs can be addictive, and that sort of thing. Setting goals and achieving them also releases testosterone. And when we think about it, when we take a step back and we take a wider look at sort of what the gym is at a very basic level, it really is just goal setting and goal achievement, both in the short term, in the immediate session, as in I need to do 3 sets of 10 squats right now, and in the long term, something like I need to do 10 weeks of work to complete this hypertrophy block to get sick gains. So when we're gymming, or exercising in general, but I'm just talking about the gym because that's what I do, and you often view the world through your own lens. So when you're gymming or exercising, you begin to engage what is known as the action, inspiration, motivation, positive feedback loop, which snowballs your sense of competency over time. As you complete one small action, this inspires you and then motivates you to complete more actions. So we can think about, you start in the gym, you start at something small, you notice your gains, and it inspires you to keep going, and try to get those numbers up and get those abs and that sort of thing. The real beauty of the gym as the catalyst for this is how it can start very small, of course, relative to the complexities of the outside modern world with its complex networks of relationships and social media and all the effects that has on your hormonal system. That's a whole other video in itself. But of course, just going to the gym and picking up heavy things and putting them down again is pretty simple. So the gym is pretty simple, but its prerequisites for success become more encompassing as you progress. This forces you, if you want to make some serious progress, to develop greater competency. When you start out in the gym and you're just going through your sessions, maybe you've got a workout plan you've downloaded from bodybuilding.com or something like that. That's fine for now. But if you want to progress to that next level, if you want to get really juicy, if you want to get those massive lifts, your 5-plate deadlift and your 3-plate bench and that sort of thing, you want to get really shredded, well, you need to start looking at things like nutrition. You need to start eating right. You need to make sure you're getting your 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, certain caloric requirements, depending if you're cutting or bulking. And then further from that, which is the next step, which I tell people about when they're getting into the gym, is also you've got to make sure you're sleeping right, because muscles are growing when you sleep. So even if you're eating right and you're training really hard, if you're not giving your body the chance to actually grow those muscles, where your gains are going to come a lot slower, you're going to find it a lot harder to make that muscular development, that hypertrophy, and also hit those lifts. So the gym forces you, if you want to progress, to develop greater competency. This also further triggers your hormonal reward system as setting goals, achieving them, and it also further engages the action, inspiration, motivation, feedback loop. You're constantly tripping this in the gym as you hit those new things. You inspire yourself. Obviously, we can use the internet in a positive way. We can use things like Instagram, and rather getting put off, we can recognize the fact that Instagram can be, or not just Instagram, but the greater social media profile presence online can be a very toxic place, but it can also be very inspiring, obviously depending on who you follow and what message they're pushing. Obviously, if they're just out to make money, then they're going to be shilling for products, and they're going to be not necessarily inspiring you onto greater things. But obviously some other channels, like the Golden One, for one example, are obviously looking to uplift people, and that's going to be a good page to follow, because you're going to look at that and you're going to be like, wow, look at that guy, look at the Golden One, he's so juicy, look at these massive lifts he's doing, and you're going to be inspired. And that again is going to trigger the action, inspiration, motivation, feedback loop, But again, you're also inspiring yourself at the same time through your own actions, meager as they may be. So, for example, we look back and maybe when you start a ride out in the gym, you're benching 40 kilos. When you go from 40 kilos to 45 kilos, well, that triggers the action, inspiration, motivation, feedback loop because you're like, look at what I've done. Wow, that's so inspiring, and I want to do more. I want to get to that, I want to get a 60 kilo bench. I want to get a 70 kilo bench. And this happens over time because obviously strength is a relative thing. Where I am right now, I'm like, oh, look, man, I've just started squatting 2.5 plate for reps. That's really cool, but I want to get that a little bit further. I want to get up, I want to be squatting three plates for reps. And again, obviously being a relative thing, I have friends who are not as strong as me, and they're very impressed with their 35, 40 kilo bench, whereas I'm impressed by other thing. But the principle still remains that you can be setting these goals and achieving them, rewarding yourselves with dopamine and testosterone, allowing you to be more happy, more willing to take risks, because that's what testosterone does. Testosterone is not about aggression, it's about taking risks, and obviously aggression is part of that, but on the whole it's about taking risks, which is important for moving up the dominance hierarchy. Because we can think about, we want to move up the dominance hierarchy, we want to become an alpha or something. Well, what do? We've got to take risks. We've got to, banter with people, and there might be danger there because they might, they might roast us really bad, or we've got to ask out this woman, or we've got to associate with people, we've got to go out and meet people, and there might be rejection, and we need these hormonal boosters, or it certainly helps to have these hormonal boosters to engage, to allow us to do this sort of thing, especially if you're not the type of person who's, outgoing and that sort of thing. Like me, I'm not a very extroverted person, so I definitely believe going to the gym helps me to do that sort of thing, to be extroverted on occasion when I feel the desire to, because I'm looking at myself and going, look at everything I've done in the gym. What can I achieve somewhere else? Where else can I exhibit mastery over my environment? So that's really the crux of my reasoning behind why I think the gym, and exercise as a whole, is great for male mental health. It helps us develop and reinforce our sense of competency through the exercise of particular virtues. And again, those virtues, amongst others, being the deferral of gratification and the willingness to accept responsibility. Now, it is an interesting thing looking at the modern world, and you think, why do we need to do this? Well, it's because we're not exactly demonstrating, for men as a whole, our competency as a social unit in general. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you think back again to those proto-caveman times, and life was very directly and viscerally purposeful back then because survival was a constant effort. It was really dangerous to live back then. The life expectancy was something like in the 20s or the 30s, and there's predators and crazy shit and stuff going on the time. Survival was a constant battle, and that gave men a lot of purpose because, of course, we always have to demonstrate our competency, we always have to demonstrate our mastery, or we die. It was really that simple. But now we've created, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, a world where we don't have to worry about that sort of thing. For the most part, there are, of course, still very visceral exceptions to that sort of thing, but for the most part, society is safe, well ordered, well maintained, and that sort of thing. And this is a big problem because then men as a whole, what are we doing? What are we doing? We've already created the society, we've already created the boundary, we've made a safe environment. What do we do now? And it also doesn't help that you've got such things as obviously the blurring of gender roles within the last 100 years or so. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but we've got women taking up traditionally male roles, which is a threat to male competency. It's like we're not really expected to do the breadwinner thing anymore. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just another thing that I think men are predisposed to do. Certainly we look at the choices between men and women, and of course the job, very good for your sense of competency because you have a purpose, you have an aim, you have a goal, you have to master a certain skill, and you have to get rewards for that sort of thing. So we look at the modern world and we see an empire which has so much in terms of material possessions, but so very little in terms of, I guess, what is sustenance for the male soul. Again, thinking back to how we have caveman brains, men are designed to essentially stake out a section of territory and kill anything that enters it, essentially. We fight other men, we gang up and we fight other men, which is something else I've talked about in the channel before in my video, the male party gang structure. So that's what men do. They stake out a territory, they gang up, and they fight other men. But we don't have to really do that anymore. And we can see how it can be beneficial to sort of create this environment artificially, and men sort of transition towards these sort of things. We play a lot of sport. we do other things. We debating. That's obviously a different form of ganging up and fighting. But I think without this sort of thing, if we just sort of sit at home and watch Netflix and play video games and masturbate all day, that makes you feel empty inside. You're so purposeless. You have no control over your environment. You're just sort of blowing from one bout of passion to the other. It's not how men are meant to be. Men are meant to be staking out a territory and demonstrating their sense of competency to the gang and also to anyone else in the world. So I think the way we can help ourselves do this is by, of course, artificially creating an environment where we have to demonstrate our competency. And that's exercise. That's exactly what it is. It's like, look at me, look at my workout plan, look at my sick gains, look at my sick lifts. This is what I can do. And that makes you feel really good. It makes me feel really good when I can show people what I'm up to and they're obviously impressed by this. So that's about all I have to say on this topic for the time being. Again, just to hammer home the point one more time. Gym, exercise in general, I think, is one of the best things for male mental health. Now, of course, as I often have to say, I'd feel very guilty if I didn't say this. I'm not an expert, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a researcher, I'm none of that. I'm just a guy who does some readings, who looks upon his own sense perceptions, comes to some sort of conclusion that at least I think is valid, and now I want to put it out on the internet for people to have a think. If this is beneficial, I want people to know about it because I want people to be happy. I want us just to feel like we have purpose and that sort of thing. I don't like this sort of decrepitude of mental health that's going on in a modern society. Of course, the affliction of affluence, as it's often called, and that sort of thing. So my advice is to get into the gym, to lift some big weights and help yourself by demonstrating to yourself and others your capacity for mastery over reality. Thanks all for sticking around and have a good one.